From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
She's known as a writer who captures the essential American character, not just by chronicling their lives, but by letting us see deep into their souls. We see their hopes and their disappointments, their flaws, their fears, and we do so amazingly on a very highly granular level, up close. Elizabeth's novels are like shimmering necklaces. Each chapter is a bead along a continuum of related lives, and somehow she manages to weave this incredible tapestry of lives back into themselves in book after book. They are free of sentimentality. They are without judgment. We see the bad and the good in all, just as we might see the bad and the good in the people that we love most. There are no villains here in Elizabeth's work. All are simply human, all have their reasons, each has an intricate past. She's been called perceptive, deeply empathetic, astonishingly forceful, one of America's most graceful and grace-filled writers. She was born in Portland, Maine, daughter of a science professor, I believe, and an English teacher. She grew up in Maine and New Hampshire. She's been a writer, she says, all her life, although she didn't publish her first book until she was over 40, giving a lot of people hope here. She spent her early years after college as a waitress, a working woman, a law school graduate, witnessing some stark realities about American life and the very apparent hierarchies of class, the haves and the have-nots, the ambitious and the vanquished, the willful and the repentant, the leaders and the followers, the cogs and the rebels. Somewhere along the way, because she was a voracious reader, she acquired a keen eye for economical language and a lyrical turn of phrase. A Strout sentence, as you all know who have read her, can contain a universe. She's given us a rich collection of memorable books, each volume another testimonial of her perspective of her, and her record of contemporary American life. You know them all. Amy and Isabel was her first. Abide with Me, Olive Kitteridge, The Burgess Boys, My Name Is Lucy Barton, and now Anything is Possible. For this, she has won a Pulitzer Prize, the Premio Bancarella, among others, as well as being a finalist for many other prestigious awards. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. Wonderful to have her with us. And I want to start by asking a question that occurred to me just in looking at your book and the dedications that you made in each of your books. And Anything is Possible is dedicated to your brother, John. And Olive Kitteridge was dedicated to your mother, who you said made life magical for you and was the best storyteller you know.
Yeah.
So let's start there. I mean, how did you learn this, and their family? Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. She's still the best storyteller I know. Part of it is her affect. She's very much from Maine, and her voice is very dry, and it doesn't rise or fall. And so she chooses her words carefully and methodically, and she will just go different places in the same tone of voice. And then it was just so fascinating to grow up with that. And she did make things magical for me because as a child, you know, she would always be observing other people and making remarks about them that made me so interested in them. So it was very always interesting to be with my mother.
I'm interested in what you say about the voice, because the fact that it was always even and level and tranquil. So many of your characters are passionate and kind of off the wall a little bit, and you know, and delightfully so and wonderfully so. But the narration itself, the way that the expanse of life before you when you read an Elizabeth Strout book, is very tranquil, actually. I mean, was this what affected you about her?
I think it probably did. I mean, her voice is so much a part of me. And I also I lived on a dirt road with a number of elderly relatives, my great aunts. And they would sit and talk in a similar kind of voice. And they would talk about their husband's last meals. That was like their favorite discussion. And I can remember, you know, I had an Aunt Olive. She was the nicest of them, actually. It's interesting. But anyway, I remember her saying, well, you know, Frank had his mackerel cooked the way he liked it. And, you know, this was just what they did. And so this was the music I grew up with.
Mm-hmm. And then you went on, and you tell, I mean, in this wonderful issue, and I trust some of you saw it, in the Washington Post Book World. It's so wonderful to see Book World in a standalone section, is it not? Thank you. Well, on the very first page is this marvelous interview. And in it, of course, you talk about your family, and you talk about your past, and you talk about the fact that you came up as a young woman, not in the ordinary writer's path. I mean, you didn't do an MFA, you didn't do, or, you know, start teaching or whatever it is, or go to work at a publishing house. You went to work as a waitress, I think in a textile job as well. You did a number of things. Tell us about that portion of your life.
Right. It never occurred to me to get an MFA. I don't think I even knew what they were. So I was just trying to make money.
Right.
And so the first year after I left college, I worked at the college as a secretary in their secretarial pool in the basement of the office, you know, their office, the windowless basement. And that alone was interesting because, you know, I went from having relationships with the professors, which were like, oh, hi, how are you, you know, to like just, oh, here's what I want typed. And it was just very interesting for me to understand the difference between what it meant to be a college student and what it meant to be these secretaries that I worked alongside of. And their lives were very rich and had all sorts of things to say. You know, we all talked, and yet the professors did not acknowledge them. And that was a little interesting, you know, my very first glimpse of like, I get it. I didn't get it, but you know.
And then you were a waitress for a while, or the pub in England, I think, right?
I waitressed in not every, but almost every restaurant in the East Coast. And I worked in a pub in England for a year, yeah.
And tell us about that, because you know, there's probably no no sharper hierarchy than the English language in England. And if you speak it in a certain way, you immediately categorize where you've been to school, what part of the country you are. Even though it's a small island, England has many divisions, of course, as we know. And you said something about, you know, the accents being dividing and telling about.
Right. You know, by the end of the year, I began to understand, you know, began to hear the different accents in a way that, you know, at first I didn't. And I also began to understand that people wondered what class I came from. Because there I was working in a pub, and yet I was American, so they couldn't really tell. And that in a vague sense, because I was young and, you know, sort of stupid. But, you know, I was understanding vaguely that they were trying to figure out who I was.
Yeah. And of course, we don't think we have class in America, right? But as you very, very, very well outlined in your essay, we do. And tell us about your feelings about that whole structure.
Well, a friend of mine who has taught working class studies for many, many years, we were talking about class, and he said that if we don't think of it in terms of economic situations or educational situations, but in fact, who feels more powerful or less powerful in terms of their life. And that was very helpful for me to understand that, you know, there are so many more people in the world now than when I was born. I mean in the country, and so there are, and the technology has changed and everything, and so the information is coming in different ways, and people are sort of, in many ways, becoming narrower, but they're not, because everybody has so much stuff in them, and yet there's a tendency, I think, to become one particular type that they may think of themselves as. And if they do not feel that they have power over their lives, then that reinforces itself with other voices of the same.
Right, right. And I'm struck by the fact that once you say that in this essay, all of your novels come into sharp relief somehow, because I remember, of course, in Amy and Isabel, there was the whole question of having lost an opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. Did you know that you were writing about?
No, I did not. When I was writing Amy and Isabel, which was my first book, and it took me years to write, but I thought that I was writing about a woman who ended up working in the office room of a factory because she thought she was better than the other people that worked there. She thought she should have been a teacher, but she got pregnant very early on, and so she couldn't, and she always resented that. And throughout most of the book, she feels that she's superior to the women she was working with. And I didn't even understand that I was writing about class until when the book was nominated for a prize, and the judge said, there's some interesting issues about class in here. And I thought, oh, yeah. And there were.
Right. Yeah. Well, you phrase it so interestingly in this essay, because you say that you knew this without knowing. Yeah. And I love that phrase, because to know something without knowing it.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of us live knowing things without knowing it, and I think what I mean by that is that our sense of something is true and deep, and yet we may lack the language to therefore consciously know it. And in this way, you know, books help. I'm going to give a little plug for literature here, because because when if we read about somebody else's life, it can help us recognize, oh no, I understand those feelings. Yeah. Those are feelings that I've had, and here they are articulated. You know, perhaps. So that's kind of what I mean by knowing, without knowing.
Yeah, and I was reminded, because I scribbled as I was reading that essay, that I remembered that sounded familiar to me, and I went back to Olive Kitteridge, and there is a place where a character says, you get used to things, he thinks, without getting used to things, which is sort of the opposite.
Right.
But there is that sense, and I feel it very much in your writing, that people are sort of operating on a superficial level, but there is a deep human instinct beneath it that drives them.
Right. But that would be most people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's most of our lives. I mean, we are walking around dealing with things, and yet we have our own internal things that are privately ours, and very deep, because they belong to us. They're who we are, and they can either get expressed or not, and that's what interests me.
Well, one very deep thing I think that many people in this room who are your readers knew instinctively and immediately when they read Amy and Isabel was that you understood something about the human condition that was very connective and very appealing and somehow spoke truth in a great way. Tell us a bit about how Amy and Isabel, let's start at the beginning, happened, and how it came to you, and why this mother and daughter, and why this disappointment of lost opportunity. How did that come?
Right. You know, the book, I understood, the book started as a short story because that's what I was writing at the time, and nobody wanted it, naturally. So, but it kept it kept not going away. It kept coming back. And then I finally realized, okay, I'm going to write a novel, and that was like so, exciting and nerve-wracking. And so I began with Amy, and then, I never write from beginning to end, but I thought at first it would be mostly Amy's story, and then I realized, no, this is both of their stories. And that's why it's called Amy and Isabel, because it's both their stories. So, and I realized the mother's story was just as important as the daughter's story. And toward the beginning, when I wrote the sentence, but Isabel had her own story, then I realized, oh, I can do that, I can write that. And then I can tell that story. And so, but Isabel was a little bit difficult to figure out. I had to scratch around to find her. And I did understand that there would be that punishment scene where, she cuts the girl's hair off. And I did understand that it would be for a sexual sin. But other than that, I didn't really know. So I had to earn my way to that. And then once I got there, which was like years later, I realized, oh, now I have to unravel. So I did. Another number of years.
It sounds to me that you were, almost as you were learning as you went.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that although, obviously you'd been writing forever.
Right.
And getting turned down, rejections
right.
At the beginning. And then Olive Kitteridge comes along and you win the Pulitzer Prize. But I have the feeling that what you're saying, especially about Amy and Isabel, is that it was a just kind of discovery as you went along.
Right, it was. And it always is. It always is. I never know what I'm going to write exactly. I have some, sort of sense, as I had that sense about the hair cutting scene. I thought, let's try and earn our way to that. So I'll have a sense of something, and then, I'll find out all sorts of things along the way.
And how did Olive come to you? How did Olive Kitteridge come to you? What a fabulous character.
She came to me when I was unloading the dishwasher one day. And I always remember, I just saw this really large woman, tall, big woman, standing near a picnic table. And I have never owned a picnic table, and my family has never owned a picnic table. But I saw her standing next to a picnic table, and I could hear her thinking, it's high time everyone left. And I thought, I better get that down. So I did. So I got that down. And then once I wrote that first story, it wasn't the first story, it was the story where she steals her daughter-in-law's bra. Once I got that story down, I realized I understood the form of the book almost immediately, which is wonderful because the form of the book is everything. And so I understood that I was going to do this in a series of stories that had Olive, but then I realized she's an awful lot to take. We don't want her on every page, a little too much for me and for the reader. And so then I began to realize she's a part of the community. Let's look at her from different angles, because what interests me so much is how, when we think we know someone, and we don't. We just know this part of them. And if you live in a town and you see another part of that person, that was very interesting to me. And so I began to, make the town around her.
You made her a teacher.
Yeah.
Like her parents.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can draw from that, or you're just familiar with teaching?
I just was familiar with teaching. She's a math teacher. Nobody in my family was, very good in math. But a 7th grade math teacher just seemed to be who she was as I envisioned her bulk.
Now, speaking of her bulk, there was a movie made of Olive Kitteridge. I haven't seen it. I prefer to stay with the book. First of all, how did you feel about the movie?
I thought they did a wonderful job. I really did.
From the pictures that I've seen of the movie, this was not the Olive Kitteridge I had pictured in my mind.
Right. Well, I think Frances McDormand's a pretty woman.
She is.
And, my Olive doesn't look like Frances, but I thought Frances did a wonderful job creating her Olive.
So you approve?
I did. I really did. Yeah. Very
Did
much.
you have anything to do with it? Did you?
No.
No. Okay.
I had many conversations with Frances about Olive, and then I spoke to the screen director for I mean, the screenwriter for, you know, an hour and a half one day, and then I spoke to the director for an hour and a half one day, and that was it.
So you win the Pulitzer Prize. You've had this tremendous trajectory from, you know, rejection to that. What happens after you win the Pulitzer Prize? Are you, do you say, well, that's it, and, you know, now I'm going to write what I want to write? Or do you say, oh, God, now I have to write something that's better than that? Or, God, will I ever be able to write anything like that again? Could you tell us a little bit about how you felt?
You know, I was just shredding some old journals the other day, and I found a line that I had written, and it said, I won the Pulitzer Prize, and this seems to impress people.
Did it impress your mother?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it must have.
Yeah.
How would you know? I assume it did. I really don't know. Must have. But it was funny to come across that, you know, as my response. But anyway, I think I won it late enough that you know, I have always had a sense of responsibility to my reader. I think about my reader as I work, and it's like we're involved in a dance together. So that didn't change. I have more readers as a result of winning the prize, but my level of respect for the reader and my need to, you know, hold up my end of the bargain hasn't changed. So I think, you know, that was always there. So it's still there.
Writing is a lonely business.
Yeah.
And reading is a lonely business. I mean, basically, you've got to do these things alone.
Right.
So who is the writer, or the reader, excuse me, that you're writing for? Who is that person?
Well, I make one up. I make up an ideal reader. And, you know, I figure I can make up characters. I can make up an ideal reader. So I do. And I have, it's actually not male or female, but it's a person who probably needs my book, but they're asking for, you know, they're patient, but they're not too patient, and they're willing to maybe cut me a couple of little mistakes, but that's it. I need to be delivering to them truthfully, and they will receive it on that level.
Tell us about Anything is Possible. I love that title, number one. Where does it come from? But number two, it is sort of this rich stew of lots of, well, all your books have lots of people and lots of emotions and points of view. But Anything is Possible seems to me to be the most stewy book that you've written.
There we go.
You know, that there is you could almost break off those chapters and they would be novellas of their own or short stories of their own. I feel that a little bit about all of your books, but never so much as this book. It's a wonderful creation. It is sort of a great view of American humanity. Tell us about your writing of this book.
Well, I really started the book at the same time that I was writing My Name Is Lucy Barton, because when I was listening to or writing the different scenes of the mother and the daughter talking about the people from her past, I became curious about those people. And I thought, well, you know, what happened to those pretty nicely girls? Oh, well, let's think about that. You know, and I would scribble down some scenes, and I would think, what happened to Mississippi Mary? And so I would scribble down some scenes. And then I realized by the time I was done writing My Name Is Lucy Barton, I realized, oh, I'm going to have a book of these people. And so that's where it came from. Right.
You make it sound as if, as a writer, you're constantly having a dialogue with yourself. Is that true? Are you constantly sort of?
I guess I am.
Yeah. Okay, which leads me to the next question, which is, you're constantly having a dialogue with yourself. You're creating this wonderful cast of characters. To what extent, you know, I think Freud said, everything that you dream is you. So whatever nasty villain you have there, or whatever, you know, fabulous moment, it's all you. Are these characters all you?
You know, I mean, yes, to a certain extent they have to be. Because, first of all, I'm the only person that I know, if I even know that, which is questionable. But you know, so the core emotion, there has to be a kernel of something that I understand to be true in every person, even though I'm not them. I'm not Pete Barton, I'm not Tommy, you know, but I have to understand some kernel of truth about them from the inside in order to write. So, you know, in that sense, they're all pieces of me, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's obviously a rich trove within Elizabeth Strout. You said something in another interview, I think it was with The Guardian, and you said, what has always fascinated me most was, what does it feel like to be another person?
Right.
And now you've just said that you wanted to know what happened to the Pretty Nicely Girls, and that prompted you to write something else. So, but that sense of empathy, that what does it feel like to be another person? What does it feel like to be
Right.
that person who is not a very nice person?
Right.
Or that person who is, you know, is such a softie and should have a better spine. Where does that come from? And tell us your feelings.
You know,
about
I don't
that.
know where it came from, but I do remember at a very young age recognizing that that all of us would only see this world through our own eyes, and that was a little upsetting for me, because I wanted to know what it would feel like to be another person. Even for 5 minutes, I just thought, what does it feel like to be, you know, my Aunt Olive talking about her husband's last meal? And I just would never know. And so that, I do remember at a very young age wanting to know, and that's never, ever left me. And the frustration of that has never left me. And that's such a motivating force behind my work, because I want to know what it's like to be another person, and I have to accept that we won't know. But I think, you know, I remember when I was young also, I remember reading in a book, and I remember thinking, oh, I've had that thought. You know, I didn't know anybody else had that thought, and I can't even remember what the thought was, but I remember the feeling of reading a book and recognizing that somebody else had had a thought that seemed private enough I didn't know somebody else had it, and I realized, oh, you know, literature can do this.
Your characters all have either they feel a oneness of character, or they are flawed in some way, and we know it, and they know it. You're very interested in character. Last night at the festival gala for the authors that was held at the Library of Congress, David McCullough said, you know, there is such a thing as the American character. There is such a thing, and we're taught it. We don't know we're learning it, but we all sit at our parents' dinner table. We sit with our own children at the dinner table, and that thing is given like a black box. You're interested in character. Do you think we have an American character? Do you think that there is, and do you think we can hold on to that?
I think, yes, I do think that we have an American character. I think that it's interesting. Yeah, we do. We're Americans. That means something. It means many different things, but it means something to Americans, and it means something. So I do think that we have American characters, and I don't know if we can hold on to it. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know the way the world is shifting, how much. That's the answer to that.
The big question. It's the big question. Tell us a little bit about how you work. Are you disciplined? Do you write as the muse hits you, or you sit down every day and pound some words out and see how it goes? How do you work?
I don't wait for the muse to show up, you know, because it doesn't show up that frequently. It's my job. So I sit down. I try and sit down, theoretically, I try and sit down every morning as soon as I, get my husband out of the house, or else I'll leave the house to go to my own studio. So I try and write every day. It's my job. It's just what I do. And so whether I feel like it or not is not relevant.
Right.
Because people go to their jobs whether they feel like it or not. So I sit down and I work. And some days it's good and some days it's not. Just like a lot of jobs.
So it's a full 8-hour obligation.
Yeah, only I think, if I'm really into something, then I'm thinking about it almost all the time.
Do you look for distractions?
No.
No. Good. Keep writing. It's time for your questions. So please think of some questions and come to the mics here and ask Liz Strout what you'd like to know about her work and how she does it. Step right up, please. And I will ask one more question, which is this sense of work that you just described, this discipline. Did that come from your parents? Did that come from yourself? Did that come from the law school?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
It probably came from my parents. My parents were very hard workers. My brother has been a very hard worker, and I have always been a very hard worker. It's just what we were brought up to work hard. That's
Are
what
you
we
working
did.
on another book?
I am.
Wonderful. Is it characters that we can be told about?
I can't tell you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, good
I
enough.
would love to tell you.
Okay, no. Well, you will eventually. You will eventually. Let's start over here, please.
Hi. This is not so much a question, but just a thank you. My husband and I, usually when we go on vacation, we pick a book to read together so that we have
nice.
something to
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about. Not that
Yeah.
we don't have other things.
No, I understand.
But a few years ago, we chose the Burgess Boys, and we both really liked it. He's a graduate of Bates also, so that made him, want to read it. But we just had such a good time, and it's still something
So
that
glad.
sometimes it will come up in conversation. Oh, that reminds me of that book.
I'm so glad to hear
so
that.
it really touched both of us.
I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you so much for telling me that. That's wonderful to hear. Really.
Next.
Thank you.
I really like the question you asked about the title of Anything is Possible, because I love the book, also really love the title, so.
Right, I
You
never
can-
got around to
and you
answering
didn't-
that.
yes.
Right, right. And the title came because of the last story, and really the last sentence, which I did not write at the last, I wrote that earlier, because I don't write from beginning to end ever. And so I had written that phrase earlier, or that scene, or played with that scene, and that phrase, anything is possible, stayed in my mind. Because I understood it would be in that final sentence, whatever form that sentence was. I thought, that's really what this is about. And so that was the title of the book. And then, it worried me a little bit, because I thought, well, it's not a truthful thing, but it is in terms of this book. Anything is possible in terms of, the moments of grace that people can receive. It's not literally true, obviously, but thank you.
Thank you. Over here, please.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if you have a character that still haunts you, or one that's your favorite.
I have a number of characters that are my favorite, and one of my favorite characters is in this book, Charlie Macaulay, who went to Vietnam. I have no idea why this man has affected me in a particular way, and so he's my current favorite, because whatever is most recent stays with me, and yeah. And Abel Blaine, I love him, and Dottie, but that's all in this book. And I do have, I just love them all. That's the truth. Anybody I wrote about, I really do.
The
love
naughty
them.
ones and the good ones.
Yeah. But thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so I have a question about Olive Kitteridge, her character. I read the book at a time when we had recently discovered someone in our family had borderline personality, and it explained so much about her behavior. And I wondered if that was something, and Olive just rang so true to me. And I wondered if that was something that had occurred to you, if as you were writing her, or not.
No, it hadn't, but you're not the first person who's brought that up. I mean, Olive's been diagnosed with a number of psychiatric issues. And one time when I went to a book club, this woman said to me afterwards, "Well, it was interesting to meet you. I thought we were going to have dinner with a real depressive." So, I mean, it was an Olive Kitteridge book club, but so, you know, whatever. But no, but you're not the first one. So she's, you know, I'm glad that she.
I just felt like
With the book.
I get her.
Yeah.
Olive,
Right.
she's so hard to deal with, but like I feel
Right.
like I get it. 'Cause
Right.
I was working through that way.
Right. Well, good. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah, good.
Thank you. Next question.
My name is Lucy Barton felt to me like a memoir. So I was surprised to read about your upbringing. How in the world did you enter that world?
Right. And I meant it to be like a faux memoir. I mean, I meant this to be Lucy Barton's memoir. But how did I enter that world when it was so different from my childhood? You know, I understood her background somehow. I just began to really understand it. And I went to school with a boy, I mentioned this in the essay, I went to school with a boy who was from that kind of background. And every rural town that I've ever known has had a family like Lucy's. It's just so poor and so odd that they're ostracized by everybody. And there was a family like that in my hometown, and this boy never spoke. He never spoke, and nobody ever spoke to him. And one day the third grade teacher said to him, you have dirt behind your ears. Nobody's too poor to buy a bar of soap. And that kid got so red. And I always remembered that. And I had a sense of what his house looked like because I would go by it every so often. But anyway, so that's how I did it. I don't know how I did it, but I entered into that world and brought her through. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Next one, please.
Hi, good morning. My question is, during the talk, you mentioned that you shred some of your journals, and I'm
Yeah.
just curious, why did you shred some of your journals?
Oh, because they're so foolish. They're so, you know, they're so worth shredding. It's just, you know, one street, whatever. Thank you. But I mean, because I did.
Thank you for the question. Over here, please.
Hi, Elizabeth. I'm from Maine, and
Where?
Portland.
Okay.
And we have a house in Islesboro now. One of the things I think you really get right from as a Mainer is just the frugality of a lot of Mainers. And there's one scene, I think it's in the Burgess Boys, a brother comes home to visit the sister, and the house is 50 degrees.
Yeah.
Which is a thing.
Yeah.
And then one of the themes that I see in your books is the person in the family who's gotten away and made it and then comes back. And Lucy Barton, there's some really vivid scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You know, I think that, and also like Jim Burgess, he's made it supposedly, and then, you know, he comes back and stumbles around. And I think that it's just any dichotomy that you can get on the page is interesting. And I did come from a very small town, and I did end up living in New York City. So that is a thing that I'm familiar with, the change of going from an environment like the kind I grew up in and then living in New York. So that's interesting to me personally because I've experienced it. But I think that, you know, sometimes people talk about those that have been trapped at home or have stayed at home, and I don't think of them as trapped or staying at home. I think that's simply you know, like for example, Susan Burgess. I always remember this woman in New York City. She said to me, "Why didn't Susan just leave?" And it was so interesting to me that she would ask that, because why would Susan leave? It's her home. Why in the world would she leave? So the New York person didn't understand that, and I found that interesting, you know, for a number of reasons. But Susan lives her life. She's not trapped any more than anybody is, whether they're living in New York or Shirley Falls, you see. So, so that's also interesting to me. you know.
And then the person who gets away and makes it doesn't really get
No,
away and makes it.
because nobody does.
We only have time for one more question, so.
Hi, I love your work. Thank you for coming here today. I was wondering, you spoke to the fact that you don't ever write from beginning to end. And I was wondering, and it's kind of a two-parter, if you could speak a little bit about when you know how the process comes about of putting the pieces together, and whether you know the end at the beginning or where the end comes to you, and how you. So I'm a nonlinear writer, and I'm trying to figure out how you get those pieces.
You know, I'll write in scenes. Every day I just create different scenes. And after a while I begin to see that they'll connect in some way. And so whether it's a story or a novel, I will understand the connection between the scenes that have. The scenes have to have a pulse to them. They have to be living. And if they do, then they will begin to connect. It's why I never worry about plot, because that's so artificially placed onto something. But if it arrives, you know, from the work itself. And so I will begin to recognize the connection between things. And then at some point, I do have to think, okay, now where am I going to start? And then I'll start to pull it together, you know, with as tight a thread as possible. And then the ending, you know, I will have probably already written the ending. And with the last page of Olive Kitteridge, you know, I wrote that way before I wrote the story that it ended. And I just wrote that last page. It just came to me, and I wrote at the top, end, question mark, and thank God I didn't lose it. Because I easily could have. You know, I'm really very messy as a writer, and I could have lost it, but I didn't. And so as I was writing that final story, I thought, wait a minute, I have the end of this. And I did. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And unfortunately,
Thank you.
speaking of endings, I just want to say Liz is going to be signing her books at 11:30. Please go and meet her in person and sign, have her books signed for you. Thank you, Liz, for coming.
You.
It's been
Thank
wonderful.
You
It's terrific.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.